Welcome back. This is our second session on the skill development part of the course. We are going to look at the 2014 released items here. So I'll give you a second to open up that document so you can follow along with me. I have two parts of the document open just so that I can see the questions at the same time as the sources. So if that makes sense to you, you might want to do the same so that you too can have two windows open. So I'm going to, as I've done in the previous lessons, I'm going to go through the questions from this release package that are relevant now for politics. The economic ones have been done on a previous video, and then we will circle back one last time, see if there's any kind of loose end questions for the rest of the course that they have created. So it's probably enough time there. You're probably ready to go. I'm just gonna get some water. And here we go. So, looking through the sources, we need to find some that look political. So, that's Adam Smith. We've done these questions before. That one we've done. Okay, number 8 has some political terms in it. Establishing youth groups, so we could probably do number 8 together. So let's take a look at the question for number 8 and see why. All right, there we go. The political techniques listed are used primarily by a dictatorship to do something. So what techniques are listed? We have youth groups, we have implementing education, we have media, we have conscription, we have holding mass rallies. I see a lot of things targeting hearts and minds there, other than conscription. But maybe once in the military they can indoctrinate you. Okay, well, let's take a look. Provide security for its citizens. Let's think about that security. Are they going to be safe because they're being indoctrinated? Are they being safe because the media is censored? Or is the mass rallies making you a safer? Well, you could make an argument, yes, but that's a stretch. Intimidate and threaten external enemies. Again, by having a rally of 1 million people all chanting your name, that's going to be a message sent to the rest of the world. But that might not be the primary goal. Gain willing acceptance to its right to govern. Or at least the pretense of that, right? Because, I mean, Hitler doesn't need the acceptance of the people. But will these things give him the perception of the willing acceptance? Youth groups, compulsory education, censor the media, hold mass rallies. It gives this atmosphere of consent. I'll go with that. Protect society from propaganda and indoctrination. It's not protecting society from. You could say protect society with propaganda and indoctrination, and then it would be more viable of an answer. But they're actually using propaganda and indoctrination, not protecting society from it, but exposing society to it. So that can't be the answer. Let's go back to the sources and find another political one. Oh, there we go. Questions 11 to 15. Speaker 1 would most likely favor a political system. Well, we need to just go to Speaker 1 and figure out ideologically where they're at. Abandons democratic government altogether. So if they're non-liberal, if they're pro-authoritarian, it's A. Now, if I don't want to remember 4 things in my mind at once, I can go back and forth 4 times. It's not a bad idea. Video could be an hour long then. But in a diploma setting, I might actually do that. Returns to a democracy in which women were denied the right to vote. That's very specific. So this guy is going to have to hate women, somehow be an anti-feminist and anti-women's rights. They're going to have to specifically be mentioning women for me to think that it's B. Restricting voting rights to those citizens paying a threshold level of taxes. Again, C is very specific, right? Somehow, in order for it to be C, this guy's got to have a rant about taxation or a rant about wealth or something. Limit voting rights to citizens who prove their knowledge. So B, C, and D are all talking about limiting democracy, B is saying it should be on gender. C is saying it should be on wealth. D is saying it should be on knowledge. And A is saying, no, let's just limit it totally. Okay, so I get it. Is it completely limited from women, limited to wealth, limited to knowledge? Let's go to speaker 1 and see. Speaker 1, not all citizens have the ability to contribute to political decision making in a productive way. If all citizens were involved, government might end up being directed by an emotional mass. I think the answer is coming. The right to vote should be limited by law. Otherwise, direct democracy might result in what has been called a dictatorship of the uninformed. Dictatorship of the uninformed. Limiting voting rights to citizens who prove their knowledge regarding key issues. So we don't want a dictator. The problem is democracy can lead to a dictatorship of the uninformed. The solution would be limiting voting rights to citizens who are informed. D's your answer. Interesting. The point of view of speaker 3 differs from the others in that it does something. Calls into question the value of basing political decisions on citizens' input. Thinking about it, I'm resonating, I'm allowing that to, okay, what does that look like? Acknowledges the reality that citizen participation in many democratic systems is limited. Recognizes that lack of citizen participation is probably a positive aspect of many democracies. Argues that education and experience are prerequisites for holding political office in democracies. Okay, these are long answers. I may have to go back and forth more than once. So let's go see what 3 thinks. Most individuals do not expect to have much influence over the government decisions that affect society as a whole. Often, only those who show success in business and in acquiring property and wealth actively participate in the democratic political process. However, ensuring that democratic rights are respected must remain a central aim of government. So this person likes democratic rights. Their concern is that not everyone's participating. And their concern is that only wealthy people seem to be participating. Okay, could be Canada. So concerned that not everyone is participating. Wants full participation, so it's not that. Thinks that some people don't participate because they don't have the right or think they don't have the right wealth or experiences, so it's not that. Wants more participation, so it's not that. It's got to be B. See how easy it can be? 13. The 2 speakers who would disagree most strongly. So this is a very common way of formatting a question. They want you to put the speakers onto some kind of spectrum and say who disagrees with each other the most. So now it would be helpful to kind of write next to each one of them and say, you know, how extreme are they? So who are the 2 extremes? Okay, so one didn't like democracy, right? So on my spectrum, I'm putting them on the side of authoritarianism. Now, I'm not having a spectrum where it's authoritarianism, democracy, and authoritarianism. I'm not going radical, liberal, conservative, reactionary. I'm just going to say pro and anti-democracy. So he's anti-democracy. So I kind of need to get the guy that's most pro-democracy. This guy was pretty pro-democracy, but I haven't read these 2 yet. The individual citizen is inherently more important than the group, and democracy would function better if individuals showed more respect for the freedom of others. Justice and the protection of freedom must originate from constitutional guarantees. Individual rights must be protected within the larger. So this is a pro-individualist. 1 and 2. 1 and 2 is not an option. So we avoided that. So let's look at 4. Society is composed of individuals who agree to sacrifice some personal freedom in order to maintain order and stability in society. However, each individual should have an equal voice in political decision making. Each individual should have an equal voice in political decision making seems to be saying the opposite of this concern about dictatorship of the uninformed. I'm going to go with 1 and 4, which is B. 14. The speaker's comments could most appropriately be placed in the context of a debate about the desirability of having elite groups govern. Are they talking about elite groups? Well, this guy is saying we don't want elite groups. This guy is saying elite groups. This guy is saying we have elite groups, but we shouldn't have it. Yeah, I could see that. The legislature acting as a check on the executive power. We don't see any reference to that. Allowing the judicial, we don't see any judge things or anything like that. Holding elections more frequently to encourage greater citizen participation. Although they talk about apathy, they don't talk about why apathy, and they don't mention it's because there's not enough elections. But they do talk about elite groups and whether or not they're good. So I'm going to go with A. All 4 speakers acknowledge that an essential function of government is to determine the extent of individual rights, encourage the growth of direct democracy, limit voter participation, regulate the influence of different individuals. Well, they don't all agree that direct democracy is good. They don't all agree that we need to limit voter participation. They don't all agree that we need to regulate the influence of some. But what they do agree is that we need to determine how much individual rights people get. Source 1 might say very little, source 4 might say a lot, but at least that's a question that's common to all 4. A is going to be my answer. All right. Okay, we've already done 16 in the past. Let's go to 17. The main reason for the electoral support referred to in the comment is that these classes were the most. The electoral support for fascism in Germany during the interwar years came overwhelmingly from those of the middle class, in particular from those of the lower middle class. Distrustful? Well, they didn't love democracy. Attracted to the policies of collectivism? Adversely affected. So the question really is, why did people come to Hitler? Economics is a big part of it. 6 million unemployed people in 1933. Instability is a big part of it. Political, social, and economic instability. C includes A, but tells us so much more. Some people were attracted to Hitler because of A, but A is included within C. C is my answer. All right. All right, 18 to 21 look like it's about like guns and stuff. I think we might be able to do that. Cartoon 1 suggests that Canadian security efforts have provided a boost to security agencies without benefiting other Canadian industries. Ignore the need for rule of law. So again, language is key. We need vocab. Challenge liberal principles. We've seen that as an answer to questions before. Succeeded more in reducing threats than Canada. Are we really going to be saying that America did something better? Well, let's see. Cartoon 1. So the United States is locked down. Canada is an open door. So there is a pull to this. But challenge liberal practices. Could we see this as being with the gun and that? What's the liberal practice? Liberal practice might be freedom of movement. So is the cartoon suggesting that this has made this more safe? Or is the cartoon suggesting that this has made this more illiberal? So, being that we often associate USA Patriot Act with illiberalism, I'm probably going to jump towards C. By using fingerprints to represent citizens, the creator of Cartoon 2 is more likely expressing concern about. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Number 19, potential for civil unrest. Would I show fingerprints to show civil unrest? Erosion of personal privacy. Okay, I know what I would draw for that. They're all clumped together, hard to be private. Decline in collective norms. Emergence of racist movements. Well, I'm not really seeing race there. Okay, now my computer's freezing again. Decline in collective norms. Using fingerprints. Fingerprints. Erosion of personal privacy. Well, they're all muddled together. It's hard to be private. This person and this person, there's no privacy shown here. And it's kind of a blur that you're all being, instead of like, your fingerprint is what makes you unique. And that uniqueness is being blurred as we're all kind of being grouped together. There's a bit of a pull there. There's some pull. Declining collective norms. I feel like I'm reading this wrong. Decline in collective norms. By using fingerprints to represent citizens, the cartoonist is most directly expressing concern that we are declining in our collective norms. But before 9/11, we didn't really have, a collective norm. A collective norm, I'm really thinking of collectivism and a collective state and the way that you must adhere to collective norms. And that's really anti-liberalism. And the idea of erosion of private property, personal privacy, is something I'd associate with 9/11. And I can see how the fingerprints, they're no longer personal, and there's nothing more personal than your fingerprint, and all of them are all kind of grouped together, and there's lack of privacy. I don't love the question, but I'm going to go with B. I don't love the question. I'm not in love with the question. It's not a great question. I'm sorry. I struggled on it. 26 to 29. Which row correctly matches techniques of dictatorship to the examples provided? That's a cool way to group a question together. Indoctrination, example 2, 4, 4. Force and terror, 4. So what we have to do, we have to read the techniques and say, well, what's being shown here? That seems pretty straightforward. I'm waiting for like a moment, right? Now, we have 2 1s here, so there's a 50% chance that's scapegoating. We have 2 4s here, so that's a 50% chance that that's indoctrination. So let's go take a look at example 1 and see if it's scapegoating. And then we can narrow it down to at least half. As part of the Cultural Revolution in Communist China in the 60s, many people were publicly identified and ridiculed for being enemies of the state, whose actions were a barrier to the advancement of the People's Republic. That's scapegoating. So now we're down to A and D. So now let's look at example 4 and see if it's indoctrination. During the military dictatorship nope. Why did they put 4 over here? In Nazi Germany, the education system was highly controlled by the state. Indoctrination, right? Education curriculum controlled by the state. You must learn Nazi philosophy. That's indoctrination. Again, I would read this 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why you gotta, I guess they're doing it clockwise. You gotta be careful to actually see what examples they are. I almost read that one by mistake. So 4 is indoctrination. Indoctrination, D is our answer. Totalitarian states commonly employ methods used, such as those in examples 1 and 3. So 1 was scapegoating. 3 we didn't figure out yet. Totalitarian states employ techniques such as scapegoating with the objective of enforcing racist policies. In Hitler's Germany, that fits. In the example of China, it didn't. Restricting civil liberties while maintaining a facade of democratic rule. Not all of them care about that facade. reducing the possibility that dissent against the regime will become widespread. So scapegoat, redirection of popular discontent, redirection of dissent, maybe. Ensuring that the regime maintains the support of the most financially advantaged or disadvantaged. No, that's not going to be it. So we got to figure out what 3 is before we can actually answer that. 3. During the military dictatorship in Argentina in the 70s and 80s, many opponents of the ruling regime were executed. So we have scapegoating and we have force and terror and purging, reducing the possibility of dissent. You're not gonna have dissent against me because I just killed 1 million people, even some that were closest to me, to show the power of McBride. Yeah, we're gonna go with that. For which of the following writing assignments would the information in the diagram be most appropriately applied? Students love questions like this. How do authoritarian political governments gain power? Well, techniques of dictatorship, they're talking about scapegoating, they're talking about purging once they were already in power. So I'm not going to go with A because they were already in power. What methods do authoritarian governments use to maintain power? B looks like the answer to me. How does the international community respond? There's no focus to that. What conditions in the society create the environment in which people are willing to? And it's not talking about the events in Germany before, right? Before Hitler. It's talking about what happens after the dictatorship's in power. How do they maintain power? So this is a common theme, the gaining and maintaining power in dictatorships. So definitely take a look at that. Soviet representatives would most likely have defended their use of the actions portrayed. What were their actions? In the Soviet Union, voter turnouts were very high, but choices were limited, so they only had one party. Needs of the individual primarily concerned of the party, thus a single party. I'm sure ruling interests of all are best represented. So why would they say, well, you know what, it's okay to have one party? Speeding this up a little bit, I could see a poll to C. You know, if we have one party, then if everybody's within the party, then dialogue within the party can actually create much needed change. It's an interesting twist. 30, in the 06 election, the NDP received 17.5% of the vote. The party elected 29 seats, 9.4% of the seats. So that's an electoral system question, very common. Which of the following statements is most directly supported by the information presented? Well, NDP is not an extremist party. Apathy among the electorate is a result of lack of clearly defined differences. It's not focused on that. The number of elected representatives of a party may not be accurately represent the opinions of the electorate. I mean, I don't want to be rude, but that is clearly what that source is about. It's a matching game. It's a link. Economics, economy, economics. Page 12. Political action. For each action, decide whether historically the action would have been regarded as acceptable or unacceptable in authoritarian and democratic states. So this fits. The highest court in the country rejects a law endorsed by the head of state on the grounds that it is unconstitutional. So is that acceptable or unacceptable to who? Well, this would be unacceptable to Hitler. He doesn't want a judge saying no to him, but we expect to see it in America. D. A government agency administers state elections and reports on election results. A government agency administers state elections. Okay. So do we have in Canada a government agency that administers the election and reports on election? Well, CBC reports on it. Government agencies, so we have, a government agency that regulates Canada elections. So could this happen in the Soviet Union as well? Yeah, it could have, but it would be spun for a different means. So I think it's acceptable to both. A government agency strengthens domestic security measures in an effort to protect citizens from the threat posed by an external enemy. Government agency strengthens domestic security. So like the CIA, domestically, the FBI says we need more troops, more feet on the ground. The RCMP say we need more feet on the ground. Yep, it happened in a democracy. Would it happen in a dictatorship? Would Gestapo say, you know, there are people, elements, foreign elements trying to manipulate our, yep, they could say we need more boots on the ground too. So I'm going to say that they would both like this. I kind of like this format. I'm going to make some questions like this in the future. Lobby groups launch a media campaign to bring attention to a government policy recently approved. Well, you'd have that in a democracy. And if the lobby groups are acting free outside the will of the state, then it's unacceptable because that could be a form of dissent. The state deploys elements of the armed forces in an effort to suppress civil unrest and solidify public support for the current leadership. Well, let's take a look. Dictators would do that. Unfortunately, it happens in democracies, right? But should it happen, the state deploys elements of the armed forces in an effort to suppress civil unrest and solidify support for. So if there were riots in the streets of America and Trump sends in the troops to say, no, we must put down these riots because you must be pro-Trump. He might do that, but you wouldn't want that in a democracy. So I'm going to go see. Methods of the news media are given unrestricted access to government documents and the liberty to report on their contents. Well, that's just not going to happen in either, right? Because there are some things that are classified and definitely even more unlikely to happen there. So, nearing the end of this, thankfully, requiring Canadian citizens to return to the polls every 5 years will not ensure that governments remain responsive to voters. So they're saying this electoral reform is not going to help. The statement most directly reflects the problem that arises from a lack of I have no idea. I'm going to have to reread this. The statement most directly reflects the problem that arises from a lack of party discipline. Well, we have lots of that in Canada. Cabinet solidarity, that's a problem in Canada. Choice or accountability. Let's go back. Requiring Canadian citizens to return to the polls every 5 years will not ensure governments remain responsible. Governments being responsible, it's just saying accountability. So it's D. Wow, it was really hard the first time I read it and super easy the second. So sometimes it helps to slow down and reread. The primary function of a state-controlled education system in a dictatorship is to suppress dissident activities. State-controlled. Only if the dissidents are 6-year-olds control participation in school sports. Hitler's got bigger things going on. Use propaganda and indoctrination. So these things, indoctrination, education, they're so linked up. This question's been asked so many times. Totally. Scapegoat enemies. Well, you're going to scapegoat enemies. You may do it through education, but the primary thing that you're doing in education is indoctrinating those little ones. So we're going to go with that. The last two are economics, so that's it. We will have at least one, maybe two more versions of this. There's one big exam out there still that I can go through. I'm not sure I can go through it all at once, so I might have to cut that exam in half, but there will be at least a session 3 of how to do political questions.